Cop jams a black veteran into a wall. Seconds later, his entire courtroom stands in silence. The air in courtroom 3B hung thick with the stale scent of old paper and suppressed desperation. Marcus Thorne, a man whose shoulders still carried the phantom weight of a combat pack, stood before the judge, his gaze unwavering despite the storm brewing inside him. He was a decorated black veteran, a man who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Yet here he was, reduced to a criminal in the eyes of a system he once swore to protect. The prosecutor, Mr. Sterling, a man whose tailored suit seemed to hum with self-importance, was droning on, painting Marcus as a master embezzler, a traitor to the very city he'd returned to serve. "And the evidence, Your Honor, is overwhelming," Sterling concluded, his voice dripping with feigned sincerity. Marcus felt a familiar surge of heat in his chest, a mix of fury and a cold, calculated resolve. He knew the truth. He had unearthed the real embezzlement, a vast network of corporate and governmental corruption, before he was framed. He'd seen the faces of the powerful, the greedy, and the utterly ruthless. And he'd seen the face of David Chen, his former colleague, who had smiled and shaken his hand even as he plotted Marcus's downfall. Betrayal. It was a wound deeper than any shrapnel. Suddenly, a heavy hand clamped down on Marcus's shoulder. Officer Miller, a burly man with a perpetually sneering lip, leaned in. "Keep it together, Thorne," he hissed, his breath smelling of stale coffee. "Don't make a scene." Marcus didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened. He felt Miller's grip tighten, then a sudden violent shove. Marcus stumbled back, his spine slamming against the cold, unforgiving wall behind him. The impact rattled his teeth, a sharp pain blooming between his shoulder blades. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Seconds later, the entire courtroom stood in silence. Not a single cough, not a rustle of paper. Every eye was on Marcus, pinned against the wall, and on Officer Miller, whose hand still hovered near Marcus's shoulder, a smirk playing on his lips. The silence was deafening, pregnant with unspoken judgment, with the weight of racial prejudice that hung like a shroud in the room. Marcus met Miller's gaze, a silent challenge passing between them. He saw the contempt, the casual cruelty. But Miller didn't see the fire, the unyielding will of a man who had faced down far worse than a bully in uniform. Judge Albright, a woman whose stern demeanor usually commanded immediate respect, cleared her throat, her gaze flicking between Marcus and Miller. "Officer, control yourself," she said, her voice lacking its usual bite, a subtle tremor betraying her unease. The moment stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Marcus pushed himself off the wall, his movements slow, deliberate. He adjusted his worn jacket, his eyes sweeping across the faces in the courtroom, the jury, the few reporters, the public gallery. He saw pity, curiosity, and in some eyes, a chilling satisfaction. This was their show, their rigged game. But he had a card to play. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice steady, cutting through the lingering silence. "I understand the prosecution has presented what they claim is irrefitting evidence, but they've conveniently omitted one crucial detail." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "They've omitted the truth." Sterling scoffed, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is grandstanding." "Sustained," Judge Albright said, though her gaze remained fixed on Marcus. "I only ask for the opportunity to present my side, Your Honor," Marcus continued, ignoring Sterling, "to show the court what was really happening behind the scenes at Omnicorp and how I became a convenient scapegoat." A flicker of something unreadable crossed Judge Albright's face. Marcus knew she was compromised, likely bought and paid for, but there was a sliver of doubt, a faint echo of the justice she was sworn to uphold. He had to exploit that sliver. "Very well, Mr. Thorne," the judge said, her voice firmer now. "You may proceed with your defense, but stick to the facts." Marcus nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Facts are all I have, Your Honor." He turned to the jury, his gaze earnest. "For months, I worked as a senior auditor for Omnicorp, a company that promised to revitalize our city's infrastructure. What I found was not revitalization, but systematic theft. Millions of taxpayer dollars diverted into shell corporations, laundered through offshore accounts, all to line the pockets of a select few." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "I compiled a detailed report. I gathered irrefutable evidence. Digital ledgers, encrypted communications, even recorded conversations. I trusted a colleague, David Chen, with this information. We were supposed to go public together. Marcus's voice hardened. But David had other plans. He betrayed me. He took my evidence, doctored it, and used it to frame me, making it look like I was the one orchestrating the scheme. Sterling jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is pure fabrication. Hearsay. The defendant is merely trying to deflect blame. Mr. Thorne, do you have any tangible proof of these claims? Judge Albright interjected, her eyes narrowing. I do, Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice resonating with quiet confidence. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, pulling out a small metallic USB drive. It looked innocuous, like any other flash drive, but it held the key to everything. When David betrayed me, he thought he'd destroyed all copies of my original findings. He was wrong. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. Sterling's confident smirk wavered, replaced by a flicker of concern. Officer Miller, who had been leaning against the wall, straightened up, his hand unconsciously drifting towards his sidearm. This drive, Marcus continued, holding it up for the court to see, contains the unedited, original data. It has the real ledgers, the actual bank transfers, and most importantly, a series of audio recordings. Recordings of conversations between David Chen, Mr. Sterling here, and even a certain high-ranking city official discussing the scheme and how to silence anyone who got in their way. He looked directly at Sterling, whose face had gone pale. And yes, Mr. Sterling, your voice is quite clear on these recordings, discussing payoffs, cover-ups, and how to pin everything on that troublesome veteran, Thorne. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, the bang of Judge Albright's gavel trying to restore order. Marcus remained calm, his eyes fixed on the judge. Your Honor, he said over the din, I request that this evidence be played for the court immediately. Judge Albright hesitated, her gaze darting to Sterling, then to the USB drive. The weight of her own complicity, or at least her willful ignorance, was pressing down on her. But the public scrutiny, the sheer audacity of Marcus's move, forced her hand. Order! Order in the court! She bellowed, finally bringing a semblance of quiet. Mr. Thorne, approach the bench. Hand over the drive. Marcus walked slowly, deliberately, towards the judge's bench. As he passed Sterling, the prosecutor lunged forward, a desperate, animalistic cry escaping his lips. No, you can't! Officer Miller reacted instantly, grabbing Sterling and pulling him back. The courtroom was a maelstrom of shouts and gasps. Marcus, unperturbed, reached the bench and handed the USB drive to the bailiff, who then passed it to the judge. Judge Albright, her hands trembling slightly, inserted the drive into a laptop connected to the courtroom's audio system. She clicked a few times, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then, a voice filled the courtroom, clear and unmistakable. Thorne's report is too thorough. We need to discredit him, make it look like he's behind it all. It was David Chen's voice. Then, Sterling's smooth, confident tone. Leave that to me. We'll plant the evidence, tie it to his accounts, and Miller can make sure he stays quiet if he gets any ideas. A collective gasp swept through the room. The jury members exchanged wide-eyed glances. The reporters scrambled for their pens. Then, a third voice, deep and authoritative, joined in. And the judge? Is Albright on board? A chilling silence followed, broken only by Chen's nervous chuckle. She's amenable. She understands the importance of maintaining order, and her pension fund is quite invested in Omnicorp's success. The voice on the recording was unmistakably that of Mayor Thompson, a man who had campaigned on a platform of transparency and integrity. The courtroom was utterly silent again, but this time it was a silence of shock, of dawning horror. The revelation hung heavy in the air, a poisonous cloud. Officer Miller stood frozen, his face drained of color, his earlier smirk replaced by a look of sheer terror. Sterling, slumped in his chair, looked like a man whose world had just imploded. Judge Albright stared at the laptop screen, her face a mask of disbelief and shame. Her own voice, though not on the recording, was implicated by association. Marcus stood tall, watching the scene unfold. The silence was his symphony, the collapse of their carefully constructed lies, his sweet revenge. He had endured the humiliation, the betrayal, the racist taunts, and the injustice. He had played the long game, waiting for this climactic moment. The bailiff, A man who had served in that courtroom for decades slowly reached for his phone, his eyes fixed on the now silent recording. He began dialing. Outside, sirens wailed, growing louder, closer. The doors of the courtroom burst open, and federal agents, not local police, streamed in. Justice, though delayed, had arrived. Marcus Thorne, the man they tried to break, had shattered their world with nothing but the truth and a small USB drive. The courtroom, once a stage for his humiliation, was now the scene of their judgment. Disclaimer. This story is a fictional dramatization created for entertainment purposes only.